Hey guys, it's Wholesome Joe, and this is a new series that I am calling Flea Market Film School. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, these are just going to be off-the-cuff videos, discussions, tips and tricks about indie filmmaking and my experiences as an indie filmmaker. And I thought maybe those experiences might help you. And we're going to go over every topic that you could possibly think about, even things that most independent filmmakers, and especially independent filmmakers on YouTube, don't even talk about, that I've experienced. I'm going to show you the mistakes that I made so that you don't make the same mistakes. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be a question I get asked a lot. What is the best genre as a new independent filmmaker? Like, what is the best genre for you to pick? You're trying to figure out what to make your first movie about, and you don't really know what genre to go in. And the obvious answer, we're just going to go ahead and throw it out there, is going to be horror. Everybody knows that, but that is not the only genre. Most people do tend to pick horror as their first genre because there's a lot of things you can do with that. You can do a lot of stuff with no money. You can do a lot of flea market filmmaking in the horror genre, but that is definitely not the only genre that you can go into. That is the genre that I chose when I was going into. I actually made a zombie movie. It wasn't really a zombie movie. It was more like a infected, sort of like an apocalypse infection movie. Was the first thing that I did, and I used a lot of things that I was able to get access to because I knew the area and I knew a lot of people, and I lived in a small town. And I do still think, and you know, you'll see this in a lot of other videos where they talk about this, that horror is the easiest genre to start with, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Mostly because a lot of people have access to things that are typical in horror movies, especially like locations. Like, you can shoot a horror movie in the woods. A lot of people have access to that. You can do a lot of low budget special effects makeup, and you can make a movie that's kind of campy. Sorry, my lighting just went out. You can make a movie that's kind of campy, and you know, the acting doesn't even have to be that good, and all of those things kind of work for horror. When you start getting into other genres like drama, action, and things like that, comedy even, it starts to get more difficult because you have a lot more variables that you have to get right in order for someone to want to watch your movie. Whereas with horror, you can get by with making something that isn't quite that good, and people, you know, sometimes you can make a terrible movie and people will still like it. And there's a lot of examples of that I can share with you, but I still say in 2024, the best genre to start out with as an independent filmmaker is still going to be horror. So if you like horror, then definitely, you already answered your own question. You can make a horror movie. There's a lot of subgenres of horror that you can get into. You can get into supernatural horror. You can get into slashers. You can even do a horror comedy, which is really big now. A lot of people like to do that. They can just mix the genres. I've never seen anybody do a romance comedy or a musical, or romance horror, or a musical horror film. So maybe those are things that you could try. The very first movie that I did was called Exit 101, and the distributors changed the name to Exit 101 Halloween Party Massacre for some reason. It was set in a small town, the town that I used to live in. We wrote the movie around this giant rocket missile thing that just happens to be in the middle of town. I was able to get permission to shoot there, and so a lot of it all came together because of that. So if you're looking to shoot your very first independent film, whether it's a short or a feature, you can't really go wrong with horror. And I do think that still horror movies, and I actually just talked to a distributor about this the other day, horror movies are still the easiest sell in terms of distributors because, like I said, all the things that I mentioned before, they're a lot less expensive to make. They're a lot easier to sell because there's a large market of people who still like that kind of movie, and they don't have to have as high a production value as like something else, drama, or you don't even have to have popular actors. You don't have to have named actors. It can just be whoever you can find most of the time. And I'm not saying that having those things doesn't help. They definitely do. But when you're first starting out, you don't need all of those things, and it's a good way to learn, to make all the mistakes and get all that stuff out of the way, so that when you move on to a more difficult genre and you have a little bit more money to play with, you've learned and you've made all your mistakes on, you know, fun horror movies. And I've done several. I've done a lot of horror short films. I've done a lot of horror feature films, and I do like horror, but I feel like I've at least kind of moved on from that. I definitely will revisit it from time to time, but if you're a first-time filmmaker, horror is not a bad way to go, and I highly recommend, and I'm going to do a video about this too, I highly recommend that if you're just starting out, jumping into one of the horror filmmaking competitions, like the 48-hour horror or the horror film race or any of those things. Those are really good ways to get your feet wet and to jump into the horror filmmaking, I don't know what you would call it, the horror filmmaking community in your area. And you can usually find a lot of people who are willing to help, and especially if you dip over into the haunted attraction community. A lot of those people who work at the haunted attractions, like the haunted houses, those people are typically really good about wanting to help with independent films and things like that. It kind of, there's some crossover there, so that's a good way to get some actors. That's a good way to get some special effects makeup people. That's a good way to even find a location. I actually did an entire short film at a haunted attraction, and we used their actors, we used the location, we used costumes that they had, and it was almost like a one-shot deal. And those are the things you want to look for when you're doing independent films, because the more things that you have access to, the more resources that you already have, the better off you'll be. And especially when you're doing a flea market film, you need to find as many low or no cost resources as you possibly can. So getting started, the genre is super important, because that will tell you exactly what kind of budget you're gonna have and how much money you're gonna have to spend on things. And while maybe you watched this video and you thought I was gonna have some like unknown answer, a genre that you know, like a western, like maybe you would go out and do a western, and you can go out and do a western, but a western is not going to be a cheap, low budget film. But if you have the resources to do a western, if you have the resources to do a fantasy film, a friend of mine, she loves fantasy, and me and her have had this discussion multiple times about, you know, doing fantasy films, especially in the area we live in. There's not a lot of like locations like that, so you would have to find the locations and the costumes and things. So if you really break it down, horror, I would say, is the #1 beginner genre for independent filmmakers. Comedy would probably be second, and then third is going to probably be romantic comedy, and then everything else falls in after that, just because they're harder to sell once you do make the movie. Horror is easy to sell. There's no films are easy to sell right now, but horror is still going to be the easiest in the grand scheme of things if you're trying to get it out into the market and, you know, find a distributor, even if you're going to put it on Film Hub. And you could say that the horror genre is kind of oversaturated because everybody's doing that, but honestly, there's still an audience for them. People tend to watch bad horror movies over any other genre. So, you know, people are scrolling through Tubi, they're scrolling through Amazon Prime, they're scrolling through Netflix, which you're never going to get your horror film on Netflix, you know, as much as we may want to do that. You used to be able to, but you're gonna see a lot more, you know, people tend to go and watch those movies more so than they will any of the other genres. They'll take a chance on those movies unless they know you, you know, they're friends of yours, and, you know, they've heard you talk about the movie and they're just trying to support you. Typically, your average person who is just scrolling through movies is more likely to take a chance on watching a low budget, no budget horror flick that looks good, like the poster looks cool, or the trailer looks cool, or they like the plot or whatever, or it's based on a true story, or it's about some urban legend, and they're just more likely to click on that. So horror, definitely the genre I would pick if I was a new filmmaker. I don't know what we're going to talk about next. I wanted to keep this first one short. This is going to be a weekly thing, hopefully. If you like this video, if you like my other videos, make sure that you like and subscribe so you get all the updates for what's coming soon. This is the first episode of Flea Market Film School. Flea Market Flea Market Film School. I hope it was helpful. What genre do you think is the best beginner genre? Let me know in the comments, and we'll talk next time.